My name is Simone, and I'm 20 years old. I live on the countryside in an idyllic village where half the houses are vacation homes. Not much happens here, but if you enjoy nature, it's great. I'm an outdoorsy kind of woman, my favorite element being water. I do kayaking, diving, swimming, and anything else water related I can get my hands on. I was on my way home from my night shift. I got this job just for the summer at a halfway house. It's a home for 8 recovering addicts, and there has to always be 2 people working there at night, just in case. It's usually very calm. We play cards, watch TV, cook, easy money. So, back on topic. I was driving home, and as I always do, I stopped at the little secluded lake for a swim. I can never resist a good swim, and I always got a bikini in the car. This lake isn't very large, but crystal clear and surrounded by a beautiful forest area. You would never know it was there if no one told you. The little road that leads down to the beach is narrow and well hidden. As a result, there's almost never anyone there apart from the occasional dog walker. I had only just started to swim out into the lake when I felt that my car key that I keep tied around my ankle with a piece of string didn't feel tight enough, and I was afraid it would slip off my ankle and be lost. So instead of swimming straight out into the lake, I quickly made my way around the little rocky part of a headland. Not sure that word correctly describes it, but then my English is limited. Bear with me. If the lake is slightly L-shaped, I was in the angle and could see through to the beach and car. As I fasten the string better, I look up towards my car. I'm now in a hidden spot not far from the beach and the car, but hidden behind a corner, so I can see the car from the side. I didn't see him at first, and I had to squint to make sure it wasn't an illusion, a trick of my imagination. But no. Squatting behind my SUV was a man in a bright yellow hoodie that I recognized. I didn't see his face, of course, and it was too far away to actually see who it was anyway, but I recognized the hoodie. It was Creepy Freddy. He was only 17, but very unstable, and hadn't returned from his visit to his parents the day before. We had called the police, of course, but since he usually turns up on his own after a few days of freedom and drugs, the police often advise us to wait and see. He had earned his nickname, Creepy Freddy, after assaulting a girl with a scythe for no reason other than he felt she was too beautiful. She wasn't badly injured, but still, creepy indeed. He had a long history of drug-induced, violent outbursts, and even when he was nice enough when sober, he was a nightmare when he wasn't. I thought about trying to get up, leave the car, and try and walk towards the main road. But what if he spotted me and ran after me? I had no idea if he was fit or not, and I was barefoot, and my orange bikini would be easy to spot. I decided against it. The risk of going face to face with a probably drugged, violent, and possibly armed Freddy was too big of a risk. I considered my options, and realized there was only one: to swim across the lake and reach the little cluster of vacation cottages that occupied the opposite beach. As quietly as I could, I started to swim. The swim took me over 90 minutes, and I kept turning around to see if I was being followed. I reached the other beach, exhausted and cold. I walked up the sandy beach as a young mom and her kids spotted me. I explained the situation, and she phoned the police and fed me some scones and coffee, and the best waffles I ever had. Police arrived to find Freddy gone, and all 4 of my tires slashed. I resigned from my job at the halfway house, and I hope we never meet again. Freddy is, as far as I know, still not found. I grew up in the countryside, right next to a national park, frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was kind of a park where you're not really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run. But 10-year-old me felt it was a stupid rule, and did so anyway. because the trails were perfect for it. I knew fully well that I wasn't supposed to do that, and was caught a few times, but nothing much came of it apart from a half-hearted, "Don't do it again." And I did, of course, until one day something frightening happened that made me stop. My family were horse breeders, and I would often take on one of the horses for a ride, usually in the Forbidden Park. This day, very early morning, the first day of the summer holiday, it was beautiful outdoors, misty and foggy, yet a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was so early, before 6 o'clock, I knew there wouldn't be anyone on the trail to see me, so I let the horse set off full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on part of the trail that's very steep on one side, leading down to the river, because the thought of one step too close to the edge was too much even for a kid with next to non-existing risk assessment skills. Suddenly, the horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I grew up with horses all my life and knew that that usually indicates that you need to investigate. Is there something wrong with the hoofs? Did the horse spot something that spooked it? The hoofs were fine, but the horse didn't move an inch. That's when I saw it. Someone had set up a trap, a thin, sharp metal wire across the trail, in perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and looked around, but didn't see anyone. The wire was well attached to 2 trees, and impossible for me to remove. So I led the horse around it, and to do so I had to walk a bit up into the wooded area on the side of the trail. That is when I heard the singing. What I heard was a certain song that I knew, and it was that melody, but the lyrics were different, and sung in a muffled, sniggering voice. Today I only remember parts of it, but translated, it would have been something like, "Hey, all you runners, come here passing, let the lifeblood pour out." I, as silently as I could, and with all my heart in my throat, backed away, got up on the horse, and hurried back the way I came, as fast as I could. I knew I had to tell someone about it, but at the same time, I wanted to avoid admitting to riding a horse on the trail. So now I had a problem. There was these old stories about a mad old man living in the shed in the woods. A shed that was once a cottage for a local hunter came back to me as I hung on the horse for dear life. I got home and told my older brother what had happened, and he went back there with me in tow. We found the wire trap, and after a while of searching, we also found a spear-like pole in the ground, right on the spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over the fallen tree. That's when we called the police. The area was searched and several similar traps found, but no sight of the old man. The following summer though, there was big news in the local paper about spear-like poles being found right under the water surface, directly under the little tower you're supposed to dive from at the lake. And black garbage bags filled with big rocks were found on the narrow bridge crossing the river, so that if a car had hit it, risk is it would have gone off the road and into the water. When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi, about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter of a mile north from the house, he built a small lake, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field, but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane, and we named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or two. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play Ole Miss. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. So I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bull that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field, but larger, with an L-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline to the shore, and then the small pier. Across the lake on the west side, there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line, and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling that I have come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life this day. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Bull must have felt it too, because a few seconds later, I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west, to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction, and almost immediately my eyes lit on what I thought to be half a silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overreactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree slowly. Bull stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop, and I turned my head north towards the dam while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north and always facing me. The saying, "scared stiff," was something I found to be true. For some reason, I thought it important that whoever or whatever it was did not know I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would make its path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the Army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I have ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bull dashed ahead of me, and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped some 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back. Just epic. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns, as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings and the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason, I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends, or my little sister, wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between. Who or what the hell was watching me from the woods that day? Guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back then, as a grown man with military training, as I am now. Bull lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog, the best dog I have ever known. My dad sold the land a few years after this incident and bought a beach house on the beautiful Gulf Coast. I didn't mind. The year was 1989. I was 7. And my mother had just served divorce papers to my father earlier in the month. Their relationship was an insane and mutually abusive experience, and tensions were high all around. During one particularly heated incident, I grabbed my mother's keys and purse and hurriedly ushered my younger brother outside to wait in the car for our inevitable escape. We watched the sunset as we waited. Moments later, my mother rushed into the car and jumped into the driver's seat. My father was 2 steps behind her, yelling and cursing as he reached the car window. She revved the engine up and squealed away from him in a haze of burnt rubber. Our trip was not a long one that night. We drove to a nearby lake on the edge of town. We had been there many times before, as it was close to our house, and my mother found the cool rushing of the waves to be a comfort. It was her favorite place. We parked on the far edge of the lake, and she turned the car off and rolled down all of the windows. We sat in silence as the Oklahoma wind ripped across the lake, finding solace in the rhythmic crashing of the water. She cried, and my brother and I eyed each other helplessly. Suddenly, a woman cried out in the darkness. Every hair on my arms were raised, and my mother's head raised sharply. She looked to the back seat where my brother and I were, and assured us that it was just teenagers fooling around. She said that she was going to have a look, just to be sure. My brother and I begged her not to go, but she is an incredibly stubborn woman, and told us to roll up the windows, lock the doors, and to not let anyone but her inside. My brother and I watched in horror as she passed the front of the headlights and walked into a grove of trees to our right. We pressed our faces against the glass, trying to see her through the shadows. Suddenly, she came tearing back through the trees. I moved quickly to unlock her door, and she jumped in, breathless. She started the car with shaky hands and sped away, heading to the nearest exit from the lake area. She refused to tell us what she had seen, but said that we were going home and were to immediately get in our pajamas and brush our teeth. 15 minutes after we arrived home, my brother and I were discussing the event in whispers in our shared bedroom. There was a knock on the door, and I peeked around the corner in the hallway to see that 2 law enforcement officers had arrived. I rushed back into my room to tell my brother, just as my mother came to our door, told us to stay in our room, and closed the door behind her. I was a sneaky child, and made my brother swear to be silent as I carefully pried the door open to listen. I tiptoed into the hallway and heard my mother recount to the officers the crazy scene she had witnessed. On the other side of the trees, she had seen a group of individuals in dark robes around a small fire that were speaking some strange language. She saw a young woman dressed in street clothes who was being restrained by 2 of the hooded figures. They asked for more details, but she told them how she had been afraid for herself and for her children, and knew that she had to get to a phone to call the police. The officers left shortly after, and I crept quickly back into my bedroom. My mother came to tuck us in, and my brother and I ended up staying awake that night after I divulged the details to him. I don't know what the officers found down at the lake, or what became of the investigation. My mother refuses to speak of that night to this day. What I do know is that in the 80s, there was a large satanic presence in Oklahoma, and a lot of creepy stuff happening. Also, this lake was at the south end of what is known locally as 5 Mile Road, which is rumored to have been where many odd rituals took place, and where a lot of weird things have happened. They found mutilated animal remains that is on the edge of the lake. That whole place has bad juju, even now, and is one of the eeriest places, even in daylight.